Some games have pretty strange stories behind them. It's not uncommon for a game to remain off the radar for ages until something comes along that thrusts them into the spotlight. And when you finally get into that game, it could make all the difference on how you feel it should continue its development. So, getting dragged into this title when I did, I sure didn't expect everything that's happened now to go down. Makes me wonder what kind of future we'll have for it now. But enough of this vague, needless intro. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Fortnite. Fortnite is a title that, hell, by merely mentioning it, has already got people thinking about two vastly different games. One that remains in an early access status, causing me to bend the rules again, but we all know I make ridiculous exceptions for Halloween, and another that only gained notoriety after it cloned and then drafted the ire of the latest flavor genre of the year. Hell, you might even be thinking of a third version of this game, a teased back in pre-alpha Minecraft-ish game that had you building up defenses and finding resources during the day, and using those slapdash forts and weapons to stave off an impending zombie horde during the night. Hence, Fortnite. What we have now only mildly resembles that initial vision, and if you only know the game with a Battle Royale subtitle after it, you might even be wondering how the game has anything to do with what I just said. We're covering it, rest assured. As of now, know that the version of Fortnite still behind the paywall, but fully planning to convert to a free-to-play version, is the one we'll mostly be covering, as the zombie defense gameplay is still very much a part of the game, and about the closest thing I could get to a Halloween episode this year. Thank God it's not The Crew, right? So, what can we say about this art style? Well, plenty, but I mean it certainly stands out. Even within a sea of other cartoonish games, you can easily tell Fortnite apart for its somehow more distinct style. While the environments are usually exaggerated with comically pointy cars and misshapen desks littering the various offices, the survivors and heroes are kept with a far more realistic proportion, just splashed with added color and cleaner lines. In keeping with this more cartoonish tongue-in-cheek style, when harvesting or damaging objects in the environment, they'll get this jiggle motion going, which distorts the textures and objects in waves. Essentially, think what it would be like to smack a house made of jello, and you get the idea. Of course, the jello is pretty heavily featured in the character models, with many of them being charitably described as thick, especially the female constructor model, Penny, being the one most seen often in marketing. If you perform more A with your T, these character models might grab your attention. Despite the style, not everything is happy-go-lucky, given that Ascension Storm is hell-bent on destroying the world and using those unfortunate enough to fall victim to it as soldiers in its army. If you take a closer look at these enemy husks, you might think that they're just wearing hoodies or something, and then it dawns on you that those husks have pulled their skulls out of their own mouths, and that those hoodies are flapping skin sacks that used to cover their domes. Yeah, it's pretty nightmare-fuel stuff, and probably a horrific way to go when the Storm claimed those victims. But the husks are still presented in a very comedic way, even right down to little intro vignettes that announce each new class. Now imagine that some of these husks are also children again, and yeah, dark stuff. Speaking of classes, the various hero ones have a few bits of variance between them, meaning not all ninjas or outlanders will look the same, however they do follow specific people. Every Ramirez will look like all other Ramirez, but bear striking physical resemblance to every other female soldier class. Yet you can change this by upgrading them, more on that in gameplay, and when hitting set milestones, the actual model will change to reflect your progress, adding things like headwear and survival packs. It's a nice touch, seemingly highlighting that as the disaster continues, your selected character is adapting to the new world. While this is a category that has more hits than misses, it is worth pointing out that one of the major weaknesses is its soundtrack. If we were to be kind, it's completely unfitting for this title, and so much more could have been done. What we do have is a very serene and calm music style, things that you would expect in some ASMR video or playing in a doctor's waiting room. Even the battle music doesn't really shift the intensity or make you feel the threat of a massive sentient storm hurling mutated zombies at you. Perhaps in the future they can change this, but given their post-founder development time seems to be focused elsewhere, we're not sure the music will ever be a priority. The sound effects, on the other hand, are a complete hit, with weapons sounding nice and weighty, especially the hand cannon, or as we affectionately call it, the Barry Burton, having that great punch in audio with the husks themselves reacting accordingly. Bullet impacts have a nice wet thud when hitting the husks, or a crack if you manage to put a round in their skull, while shooting the environment gives off the expected pops and dings from hitting various objects. They even managed to pull off that distinctive sound of distant gunfire and explosions incredibly well. And distance is also factored in when utilizing the telltale music of Lars's radio, or the unsettling screams of the more powerful creatures. This is something many games don't even bother to try, while many others that have don't really pull it off as effectively. Voice work is another high mark in the game's favor, with outstanding performances by the AI bot Ray and slacker scientist Lars, with amusing asides from the various heroes that you can play as. A lot of the game's comedy is really carried on how well each person pulls off the line and its tight timing.
We're not getting the response I was hoping for, so let's try this again. Think we wouldn't have to work so hard to sell the concept of not dying. Okay, new plan. Hit 'em with a repetition. Need help? Confused? Lost? Head to home base! Home base! Home base! It's your only chance to escape certain death! 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 I already know what you're gonna say! I already know! I'll fix it!
Yet there is a small sore spot in that the Survivor voices are merely okay at best. When you have such great voice work to compare it to, then it's little surprise that Survivor snippets stand out as below average. At the very beginning of the game, you'll start with a tutorial section that, while being unskippable, at least is inoffensive and teaches you the various mechanics of the game quickly. There's no splitting tutorials into multiple parts, just a logical story progression that fills you in on what you need to know as you go and help set up the post-storm world that you'll be running around in. For this introduction, you'll start by playing Ramirez, a soldier class, as she fights her way free of a mineshaft and works her way to fortification that a few survivors have built up. The section quickly teaches you about harvesting resources, crafting ammunition and weapons, as well as how to modify buildings to create the various wall designs needed in base construction. The shooting mechanics themselves are rather straightforward, outside of damage-type modifiers, being a typical third-person shooter with critical hits and headshot damage. To achieve this, you have several weapon types, from standard semi-automatic pistols and magnums, up to rocket-propelled grenades and anti-material rifles. As previously stated, the sound design makes sure that each has a satisfying sound and feel to them, making the use of all of the weapons a pleasure. Acquiring these weapons can be a bit different, however. Sure, you can find some within the world, but they tend to be the cheapest quality and gray versions and oftentimes have very low durability. Instead, you can be awarded blueprints for reaching certain milestones, completing quests, or opening a loot llama, which will be discussed in a later section. In a very helpful update, Epic Games also allows the player to craft ammunition for the gun that they're currently using by holding down the reload key. This means you won't break the flow of combat when you need more ammunition in a bind. Resource gathering is a simple affair as well. Just equip the pickaxe and start smashing away at every building, car, vending machine, and even sidewalk that you can find. Depending on what material the object that you're smashing is made of, you'll be given resources of that type. As for a couple examples, smash up a car and you'll receive some metal, smash up a bench or tree and you'll get bits of wood. Yet you may also receive additional materials, which are used outside the building process and instead in the crafting process, where you'll use items like nuts and bolts or rotating gizmos as part of making weapons and ammo. Building follows the same theme. It's incredibly simple to use and understand, as well as offering up a clever way for creating all of the different styles of wall, floor, ceiling, roof, and stair styles that you can think up. To build, simply press F1 through F4, corresponding to walls, floors, stairs, and roofs respectively, which will bring up a blueprint view of where you'll be placing your structure. From this blueprint, you can change what base material you want to use, with wood being the weakest and metal being the strongest. Once you place a structure down and it finishes building, you can then choose to upgrade it, assuming you have the skill to do so, to make it the next tier of that material. To change what style that structure will take, you can press the G key and click to deselect different squares, which will change how that building piece functions. As examples, if you select the wall and remove the center square, it'll become a window. If you remove the bottom three along with the center, it becomes an archway. If you remove the center and the middle of the bottom row, it becomes a door. Using this building technique, you may even be surprised at the variety of buildings that you can come up with, and the game even teases you by showcasing what you could build when you get your first storm shield. Well, we're talking about storm shields, we might as well start talking about various mission types you'll be tasked with completing while you play Fortnite. Storm Shield is your first introduction to these. It acts as a basic standard horde mode that allows you to build up your own style of base and defenses to keep the titular shield generator safe. For the first one, you'll be guided by the hand, but from then on you can do whatever you want with your Storm Shield, which has led to some rather interestingly unique builds amongst Grindstone. Once you're let out of the tutorial Storm Shield, more mission types will become available to you. These include, but are not limited to, Fight the Storm, in which you set up a special device used to fire off a blue beam of power into a particularly potent section of the living storm, thus loosening its hold on the area. It's the most straightforward defense mission. Ride the Lightning, in which you'll assist Lars, a rather eccentric storm chaser, in getting his weather van airborne so he can track the storm's movements and provide intel, all of which requires a defense of his van as it's gearing up. It's very similar to Fight the Storm, but has 2 shorter waves instead of 1 long one. Build the Radar Grid, which tasks you with building as many radar towers as possible to set up an intelligence network for your defense efforts. It's probably one of my favorites to play, but it can be a waste of resources if you prefer to keep them capped for use on your own Storm Shield. The mode at least provides and teaches some interesting build options. Rescue the Survivors, again, just as it says on the tin, is where you'll wander around an area and a large amount of survivors that have been sighted, and then either warp them back to safety of the shelter outright, or complete specific tasks from them before they'll leave with you. It's another favorite of ours for being more straightforward and less consuming on resources, but like similar missions of its type, it'll have you waiting around for the overall timer to expire if you try to complete it early. Retrieve the data, where you'll have to look for a falling weather balloon and retrieve its storm data by building defenses around it and downloading it to your base in order to find out why the satellites and balloons are starting to go crazy. The balloon can be shot down to speed up that timer, but you're more limited on the defenses you can build for it prior to the drop. Destroy the encampments. Much as before, the name indicates the objective and sees you hunting out various encampments, in specific but randomly generated order to clear out the areas where husks are congregating. Locate the beam in the sky and you can more easily find which encampment is next on your hit list. Finally, launch the rocket, which, much like in the tutorial, you'll be tasked with launching a powerful rocket into the storm, which will deploy another storm shield within the next region, giving you a foothold into more dangerous areas. These are the most intense defensive missions outside of the storm shields, and should really be completed in full groups. If you can believe it, there are even more mission types, but these are in higher level areas and are often just modified versions of the above, with added objectives and obstacles to increase the difficulty, such as evacuate the shelter, repair the shelter, plant the bomb, and so on, each with their own more complex ways to complete them. Repair the shelter is especially annoying when players think C-Bot defense is the be-all end-all to it and forego the actual shelter defense mission to complete it. Once you complete each mission, you'll be rewarded with a ranking in the form of a loot chest of various levels and experience to level up your character, which brings us rather nicely into that upgrade system, as it's broken down into 2 main categories: skill points gained directly from experience earned, and research points which are just earned over time. The skill point system is what you use to unlock new abilities, classes, better pickaxes to gather materials faster, or gain the ability to upgrade the player-place structures as mentioned above. Each level will grant you a set number of skill points, changing depending on what tier of the skill page you're on, such as giving 1 skill point for a tier 1, where all skills will only cost 1 point. Then 2 skill points when you move into tier 2, and everything costs 2 skill points. This also helps you do cleanup of older pages, as you can jump back to use those skill points on a previous page to fill it all in if you want. Research acts much in the same way, allowing you to improve your character by unlocking nodes along each tree. Research points themselves are acquired over time, and if you've been leveling up in the skill point tree, you can unlock better generation rates and larger overall pools. Within the research nodes, you'll find various upgrades that increase your offense, defense, and tech-based abilities, as well as being able to upgrade expeditions that you can send off for various resources or survivors. So what do you do with those resources outside of building? Well, as previously mentioned, there is a crafting system, which allows you to craft various weapons and traps while inside of a mission. As weaponry and traps have durability or limited uses, you'll need to keep track of what traps and weapons you have, and if you'll need to craft more. These recipes themselves can require additional and sometimes rarer materials depending on the level of the recipe you have. This ties into the leveling system for each individual weapon, trap, survivor, and even hero who will need the experience fed to them so they can grow in power. Unlocking bonuses at set levels that can increase durability, damage, change the elemental type, and perhaps even give party-wide buffs. Those survivors you keep collecting are used in 2 different ways. The first set are people with useful skills and can be slotted into survivor squads who will perform tasks around the base for you. In terms of gameplay, this translates to them giving you various buffs and passively increasing your stats. The second group of survivors are those willing to go out in the storm with you and can act as additional NPC fighters when you summon them using special survivor pads. They can also fill in the gaps of your party if you don't have a full group of 4. When reaching level 10 in each one of these, you'll need to evolve it, an ability that's unlocked in the skill tree, and allowing you to take that item up another 10 levels, while it may add some additional visual touches to the model. So as you can see, there's plenty to do in this game, even if what you're doing won't seem all that varied in the grand scheme. The slow burn is real and upgrading progression takes a lot of time invested. Whether you choose to spend that time with others will make or break you, though. The community section will have a lot to talk about for various reasons, most of them due to a recent update that's been making headlines. Yet the standard community that can be found within the newly titled Save the World mode tends to be fairly quiet and friendly. Players have been known just to craft and drop high-level weapons for other players, even if they don't know them. Suppose it helps that it's a pure co-op PvE experience, yet it doesn't mean that everything's great. The player base does have a tendency to not focus on objectives, instead tunnel visioning in on whatever personally they need to do, which can not only ruin bonus objectives, but can make some missions nearly unplayable. Fortunately, you can easily join friends, even mid-mission, and grant them rights to help build up your storm shield when you're present, if you desire. It's a game that feels far better with your own crew, rather than pugging it up. One thing that people always seem to want in these kind of games is the ability to kill other players. The happy, musical, Minecrafty world of Trove wasn't immune to the constant begging for a PvP mode that was eventually implemented, so naturally with a bang-bang shooty game, this pushes even harder. For a while we thought of ways that it could work, but it never really made sense with a world on the brink of being wiped out. Why would you want to take out other survivors when you're scrounging to save the last remnants of humanity with limited technology and very few people who understand how to use that technology? So of course they added a PvP mode. Fortnite has been making the headlines for another reason, and that is because PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds has begun trying to mudsling against Fortnite's new Battle Royale mode. Honestly, while I don't see the appeal, it's clear that there is a large player base for these types of Battle Royale games, and thus far, Fortnite's version has had a lot of great aspects to it, marred by some really odd decisions. First and foremost, Battle Royale is the standard start of being transported to the battle arena in a flying battle bus. Okay, maybe not standard, but it explains what you'd be doing on the island. Once you're allowed, you can press space and launch yourself from the bus and skydive towards the ground, which is where you can pick and choose where you want to land within reason. Once you touch down, it'll become a mad dash to hunt for any weapons and ammo that you'll need to fight off enemy players. Major differences between this Battle Royale mode and PUBG itself is that all the weapons have different quality levels, which isn't really a good thing depending on how you look at it, as it can feel pretty terrible to be killed by someone you get the drop on because they're using a purple quality weapon and you had grays. The other major difference is that you can harvest or destroy the various buildings in the environment, and even build your own bases, which can often lead to people using buildings to get up to vantage points, or fortifying a strong position, which makes the final moments of a round very hectic. It's a good mechanic to add. The map is also far smaller, as well as better detailed and constructed, meaning that matches feel a lot better and the world itself looks more lively. Naturally, a smaller map will ensure that people rarely die from the barrier closing in, and instead just choose to fight each other. On a downward note, the shooting in Fortnite just isn't up to snuff when it comes to accuracy and feel. While the weapons are a joy to use, the shooting itself is just too floaty, and while sufficient for the base game where the aim is just to toss tons of lead into a zombie swarm, here it just lacks precision and needs some major attention to make it feel better. Naturally, as the base game is more about cooperation and sort of banding together to battle a major threat, and Battle Royale is a competitive mad scramble for weapons, you can imagine that tensions are far higher in this mode. It's strongly recommended that you go into Battle Royale with a full party of friends, or just be prepared for people glory hounding, being angry that people aren't following their exact plans, and just general online gaming behavior. Thus far, our biggest fear is that Battle Royale is proving so popular, it may make Epic Games stop work on the base game, which is what drew us to Fortnite in the first place. Currently, the cash out for the base game is an entirely loot box based affair, if we discount the upgrade packs for the various collector's editions and the like. Now, you may be thinking, oh, good, loot boxes, that's just fantastic. Yet, here the loot boxes, or in this case loot llamas, aren't as typical greedy fare as you'd think. Instead, because progress is tied so directly to these llamas, you'll be earning a fair amount of free llamas constantly, especially if you decide to assist other players in defending their main outposts. Yet more importantly, if you don't get something you want in them, you're still making progress. This isn't a winner-takes-all, losers get some pity tokens to save up for later. Every time you get a duplicate or lesser quality item you didn't want, you can still slot that in your collection book or break it down for the experience to upgrade the things that you do want, ensuring that you'll always be gaining some form of benefit from those llamas. Each llama also has the chance of upgrading itself to a higher tier when you try to smash them. This will change the color of the llama from the standard to silver, and then from silver to gold should you get lucky enough, and the rewards will increase exponentially and guarantee high quality drops. There's also a chance to get a corrupted loot drop, in which the program chip is corrupted, and you get to pick between two different options, giving you a somewhat vague preview of what they would be. For example, you might get a choice between a handgun or an assault rifle, or perhaps a choice between a Scorch Ninja and a Pathfinder Outlander. During these special events, you'll be given event currencies for each full-size llama, and can then be used to open event-specific loot llamas. The collection book that was briefly mentioned before is actually a great way to earn more llamas and rewards, as each item you slot into the collection book to catalog permanently will earn you experience towards leveling it up. Reach a new level in the collection book, and you'll receive a reward with certain milestones, granting you major rewards like several packs of llamas or cash shop currency. The higher tier of item you slot in the collection book, the more experience you'll gain. When it comes to the Battle Royale mode, the cash shop changes up quite a bit, offering skins for your character or for your harvesting tool. These come in weekly and daily sales variety, with plans to add a seasonal section to the shop in the future. Using the current exchange rate, which is $10 for 1,000 V-Bucks, the price of the selection so far ranges from $8 to $15. Being that these are purely cosmetic, it'll come down to each individual player's viewpoint on if the cosmetics on offer are worth the asking price. So while the game does rely on the usual maligned lucky boxes to get anywhere, especially if you really want legendary quality items, the current way that they're implemented still seems rather fair. It helps that there's so many ways to earn those loot llamas, and any that you do earn will assist you in progression, regardless of what you happen to take from the llama's corpse. Yeah, smash the sentient llama piñata to get the loot. I understand the frustration, though. I've opened dozens of loot llamas and still have yet to obtain a single Barry Burton pistol for myself, instead getting several dozen junkyard pals and revolvers, 4 with 2 dice after all. I get how luck holding you back from the one thing you'd want for yourself can feel terrible, but at least the other things that you obtain are in some way useful. Other players can also easily craft you an item if you grant them the materials. While Fortnite doesn't really seem to know what it wants to be, I know what I like, and what I've seen is something I really enjoy in occasional bursts. But it's not something I can keep playing as much as I used to, and the burnout is real. Mission variety could serve to be updated and expanded upon, and the story can hopefully actually go somewhere. And I'm still pretty concerned that catering to the latest gaming trend will force a complete shift in the development focus. But what I have right now is still an experience I enjoy, as slow of a burn as this is. Here's my final rating. What makes Fortnite interesting compared to other Horde mode games is the construction and building mechanic, which is far more interesting and complex than people let on. Both in aesthetic and metagaming, you can build structures to suit your need with relative ease once you understand the nuances, making your home base into a massive castle or a section of walls. Build how you want and build what works. It's all available. What I wasn't expecting from this game was such a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, and the majority of it comes from your AI guide. Whether she's arguing with her corrupted robot companions, reporting doom and gloom with the utmost optimism, or berating potential survivors for not responding to her recruitment calls, the story and attitude of the game can be pretty damn funny. Despite the variety of builds, there's also a good amount in weapon variety, not only in quality, but how they fire, what abilities they have, and the strategy behind using them, which makes finding new gear and weaponry an interesting means of progression, even if it's likely you'll settle into a favorite set. For those looking for the PvP side of things, it's basically a free PUBG, and if you wanted to get into that latest genre trend but didn't want to fork over $30 for a buggy early access game, you can give this a shot to see if it's something you'd be into. If you want to try out the game for yourself before its apparent free-to-play conversion in 2018, you'll need to buy a Founders Pack to play it. Of course, this bullet point is going to be made irrelevant once that happens, but hopefully such packs would get converted into starter packs, as they make decent options for getting a good set of gear and hero choices starting out. Yes, of course, the loot box style of gear progression has been the subject of a lot of issues that people have had with the game, which, while understandable, aren't quite the requirement or progression that they keep getting labeled as, nor will you end up in too many white, blue, situations with those llamas. But I won't get into it because there will be no winners here. Just save up your free coins for the better packs rather than wasting them on the basic ones. Of course, if you're pubbing it up with your G's, you can buy some stuff to help you stick out a bit more from the crowd. Which might not be the best idea in that mode, but you do you. When you start piling on the rewards, loot, and llama spoils, in addition to all the points you're accruing from level up and research, diving into the menus to sort through all that shit every few runs gets more tedious than it is exciting. Not as bad as building up a gear pyramid, not even close, but still an annoying distraction as you balance recycling or collection book donations, or map out your skill tree paths. Fun for some, annoying for others. Find out where you sit with that one before you dive in. If you aren't spending most of your time in the menus, you might spend more of it in matches. Depending on how long it takes for your group to get started, you can expect most dives in the game to last 15 minutes at the least, and 20 minutes or more on average. This can be even longer with events and specific missions, making the time investment take potentially hours, which some people just might not have. It's very easy to lose all track of time in this game, for better or worse, so be sure you have that time to spare if you're looking to make headway in levels and power. If you're sick of this whole horde mode defense thing, or zombies in general, I can't really suggest you play this. Sure, there's plenty to set it apart, and for some, that might be enough. But it's still very much what it says on the tin, and playing for too long can get you the feeling of burnout fast. It doesn't matter if you're defending a lab, a scientific device, or a van, you're still defending a thing against waves of enemies, and very few missions think outside of that box. As for those PvPers, PUBG fans, and hell, even PUBG's devs themselves have lamented, the PvP is really the same game as PUBG, with almost nothing to really set it apart. This is where a lot of room for improvement could come in. Let that storm contain the husks and interesting traps. Include the differing classes, and allow for them to have their own strengths and weaknesses in that mode. Until then, it'll never shake off that rip-off stigma, and give little reason for those who already bought into its inspiration to bother switching over. Next time is very up in the air, like this whole genre lately. I guess I've got some things to consider. Hey, thanks for sticking around past the credits. I know I got like these 20-second end cards to do now, but I need to take a little bit of time, so I have to thank a Patreon user very specifically for supporting this show at the guild leader level, who would like to promote their book, Innocent Parasite, which is available on Amazon, and I'll have the link in the description for you, so feel free to check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, you can wait for those little windows to pop up and click on whichever one to your heart's desire. I don't care. YouTube's a mess.